Imagine being at the top of Hollywood, adored by millions, only to find yourself trapped, caged by a studio machine that controls your every move. For actors in old Hollywood, this wasn't just a bad dream, it was real life. Studios dictated everything from what stars ate to whom they loved, and if you dared to disobey, well, you'd pay the price. The golden handcuffs of studio contracts. Back in old Hollywood, signing a contract with a major studio was every aspiring actor's dream. It meant guaranteed roles, a hefty paycheck, and a shot at stardom. But once the ink dried, that contract turned into what some called golden handcuffs. 7-year deals seemed like a ticket to fame, but they were actually a tight leash that held actors firmly in place. Bette Davis experienced this firsthand. Warner Brothers scooped her up with a deal that gave her steady work, but there was a catch. She couldn't choose her roles. Warner Brothers decided everything. The movies, the parts, even her public appearances. At first, Davis complied, but it wasn't long before she felt stifled. She was an artist, yet she was cast in movies she found boring, even beneath her talent. When she tried to push back, the studio threatened suspension. Suspension wasn't a small slap on the wrist. It meant no pay and accumulating fines, sometimes thousands of dollars. The studio was sending a clear message. Davis was theirs to control. Eventually, she'd had enough. Davis decided to take Warner Brothers to court in England, arguing that her contract was like indentured servitude. She was tired of being treated as property, her work dictated by executives. But the studio had the power, and she lost the case. Still, her stand wasn't in vain. It showed other stars that they weren't alone in feeling trapped. James Cagney, known for his tough guy roles, felt that same grip. He hated being typecast as a gangster, always the gritty anti-hero, but Warner Brothers insisted on keeping him in those roles. Whenever he resisted, they punished him by blocking opportunities elsewhere. If he wouldn't comply, they'd sit him out, effectively shelving his career until he gave in. Actors were, in a way, stuck between a rock and a hard place. Comply and lose creative control, or resist and face the risk of losing everything. These contracts didn't just control their roles. Studios dictated every part of an actor's life, where they lived, what they wore, and who they associated with. Handlers were hired to make sure actors didn't stray from their crafted images. Even romantic relationships were sometimes monitored or arranged to fit the star's image, sometimes for appearances or publicity purposes. And if actors stepped out of line, they'd find themselves quietly blacklisted, cut off from work in Hollywood, or labeled as difficult. These golden handcuffs made actors rich and famous, but they paid for it with personal freedom, leaving many stars isolated and creatively stifled. The physical makeover machine. Hollywood in the 1930s and 1940s had an almost mythical standard of beauty. They weren't just creating stars, they were creating idealized versions of people, versions that didn't always resemble who the actors were before they stepped into the limelight. And for anyone who didn't fit that perfect mold, studios took drastic measures. These makeovers weren't just a haircut or new makeup. They were total transformations, often painful and permanent, and they went way beyond what anyone would expect today. Let's start with Judy Garland. She was just 13 when MGM signed her on, already brimming with talent and a natural charm that could light up a screen. But for MGM executives, Garland didn't look like a leading lady. Instead of seeing her as a young, energetic talent, they saw flaws. One executive reportedly referred to her as a little hunchback, critiquing her posture and physique as though she were a product that needed tweaking before going on the shelf. To make Garland fit their vision, the studio put her on a strict diet that would make most of us cringe. Her meals were limited to chicken soup, lettuce, and cottage cheese. But it wasn't just about setting rules. MGM assigned staff to accompany her at all times, making sure she didn't slip up. Imagine being a young teen, dreaming of stardom, only to be told that even a snack could risk your career. Studio handlers followed her to restaurants, monitoring every bite she took, and if she was spotted with food that wasn't on her approved list, they'd report back to the studio. Diet was just the beginning. MGM also insisted Garland wear caps on her teeth to create a more Hollywood smile. They bound her chest to make her look younger even as she grew into her teens. Her hair, her makeup, her entire image was manipulated to fit what MGM thought a young star should look like. Becoming Judy Garland, the icon, meant sacrificing a lot of Judy Garland, the person. Then there's Rita Hayworth. Before she became the famous bombshell, she was Margarita Carmen Cancino, a young actress with thick, dark hair and a proud Hispanic heritage. But Columbia Pictures didn't see her heritage as an asset. Instead, they saw it as something to erase. The first thing they targeted? Her hairline. Columbia forced Hayworth to undergo painful electrolysis treatments, a procedure that involved removing individual hair follicles to create a higher hairline and give her a more Western look. The process wasn't quick or comfortable. Hayworth endured countless sessions, changing a part of herself permanently to fit the industry's narrow standards. But the transformation didn't stop there. The studio lightened her skin tone and dyed her hair a vivid red. Margarita Cancino was gone, replaced by Rita Hayworth, a name as manufactured as her appearance. Her ethnic identity was pushed aside, reshaped to create Hollywood's new it girl. She became the embodiment of American glamour, but at the cost of her roots, her heritage, and in many ways, her sense of self. Even the men of Hollywood weren't exempt from these extreme makeovers. Mickey Rooney, one of MGM's top stars, was often reminded that he wasn't the ideal leading man. The studio constantly told him he was too short, too round, and too boyish. Instead of celebrating his natural appeal, MGM insisted he make improvements. Rooney was put on restrictive diets similar to Garland's, told to slim down to fit certain roles. And since he couldn't change his height, he was given platform shoes for certain scenes, adding an inch or two to help him measure up. For Rooney, this image control extended into his on-screen persona. MGM carefully chose roles that emphasized his boyishness, even as he aged. He wasn't allowed to grow out of the youthful parts, and the studio kept him locked into roles that suited their image of him rather than allowing him to explore new directions. Every role was carefully curated to fit a certain brand, even if it clashed with who he really was. These makeovers were far from optional. Stars didn't get a say in whether they wanted to change their looks. Studios dictated the terms, and refusing wasn't an option if they wanted to keep working. For these actors, maintaining Hollywood's version of beauty came with a price. Behind every stunning movie poster and glamorous close-up was a lot of pain, sacrifice, and pressure that few saw. Drugs, diet pills, and dependency. Hollywood in the 1940s and 1950s was a fast-paced, high-stakes environment where the demand for perfection wasn't just about looking good on screen, it was about always being on. Actors were pushed to perform at a level that would exhaust most people, juggling long shooting days, night shoots, press tours, and public appearances with little to no rest. So, when exhaustion hit, studios had a solution. They'd hand out pills to keep their stars going, creating a cycle of dependency that left many actors unable to function without the constant buzz of stimulants and relaxants. Judy Garland's story is perhaps one of the most heartbreaking examples of this. MGM signed Garland as a teen, and from the moment she stepped onto the studio lot, her life was governed by their schedule. But they didn't just expect her to show up. They expected her to show up full of energy, camera ready, no matter how little sleep she'd had or how many hours she'd already been on set. For a teenage girl, these demands were overwhelming, and MGM executives quickly realized they needed a way to help her keep up. Their answer was pills, specifically pep pills, which were stimulants designed to keep her awake, alert, and, in their eyes, productive. The pep pills were handed out like candy. Garland would take them first thing in the morning to kickstart her energy for the day's shoot. By mid-afternoon, when the fatigue really set in, she'd get another dose. These pills would push her through long scenes, elaborate dance numbers, and endless takes, all while projecting the energy and enthusiasm that audiences loved. But the day didn't end there. Once filming wrapped, Garland was given pills to help her sleep, sometimes only for a few hours. before the entire cycle began again. Imagine being a teenager, physically and emotionally exhausted, but unable to rest without medication. For Garland, it wasn't a choice. It was a routine that MGM established to keep her at her best, regardless of the toll it took on her health. This relentless pace and the daily dependence on stimulants and sedatives weren't just a phase. Garland was so young when this started that, by the time she reached adulthood, her body was already reliant on the pills. The routine that MGM had set for her became her own routine, even when she left the studio. It's a haunting reality. What began as a way to keep up turned into a dependency that would follow her for life. And Garland wasn't alone. Marilyn Monroe, another one of Hollywood's brightest stars, faced similar pressures. Monroe was known for her beauty, charm, and the effortless appeal she brought to every role. But that image came at a cost. Studios expected her to maintain a flawless appearance and upbeat energy at all times, and when Monroe struggled to meet those expectations, they didn't offer breaks or lighter schedules. They offered medication. For Monroe, the stress of maintaining her image was relentless. Public demand was high, and she was constantly in the spotlight, both on and off the screen. The pressure weighed on her, and like Garland, she began using medication as a way to cope. At first, it was a studio fix, something to help her deal with the insomnia, the anxiety, the need to perform day after day. But over time, Monroe became trapped in a dependency that was hard to break. Her daily life began to revolve around these pills, and her health suffered as a result. Hollywood's pill culture wasn't about supporting its stars, it was about keeping them working. The studios saw these medications as tools to control their actors, a way to make sure they could withstand the grueling schedules and endless obligations that came with stardom. There was little concern for long-term effects or the actor's well-being. To the studios, pills were simply a means to an end, a way to keep the machine running smoothly, even if the stars themselves were struggling. For many actors, the effects of this solution lasted far beyond their time in Hollywood. These pills, once seen as a quick fix, often led to long-term health problems. Dependency took a toll on their mental and physical well-being, leaving lasting scars. Actors who tried to break free from the cycle found it wasn't easy, as their bodies had come to rely on the drugs just to function. What started as a boost had become a chain, one that many actors carried for the rest of their lives. And this culture wasn't a secret. Pills were everywhere on set, handed out by studio doctors or even production assistants, with little thought for safety or dosage. Studios prioritized productivity over health, glamour over reality. Garland, Monroe, and countless others were encouraged, if not outright pressured, to take whatever the studio gave them if it meant they could keep working. For the stars, saying no wasn't really an option. The machine had to keep moving, and they had to keep up, no matter the cost. Image control and staged romances. In the golden age of Hollywood, being a star wasn't just about acting. It was about becoming a carefully crafted public image, down to the tiniest detail. Studios didn't just control how actors looked and spoke. They controlled how they lived and even who they loved. To them, an actor's private life was as valuable as any role, so they made sure it fit a story that fans would adore. Privacy, almost non-existent. Studios went to extremes to create perfect lives for their stars, even if it meant staging relationships to keep up appearances. Take Rock Hudson. On screen, he was the ultimate heartthrob, a tall, dark, handsome leading man who made women swoon. He starred in romantic films with Hollywood's top actresses exuding effortless charm, but off-screen, Hudson's real life was far from the image the studio wanted for him. The studio knew Hudson was gay, which at the time would have been considered scandalous. To protect his all-American image, they carefully controlled his public life, complete with fake romances. Whenever Hudson made a public appearance, he was paired with a beautiful female co-star or a popular starlet. These dates? Total fiction. The studio arranged everything, down to the smallest detail, to make it all seem genuine. Photographers were always ready, capturing candid moments that were anything but. Hudson's romances were as staged as his movies, creating the perfect illusion of the dreamy, straight single guy with charm to spare. Every smile, every touch, every glance was orchestrated to tell a story. Hudson was living two lives, one as Hollywood's icon, the other hidden and real. He had to keep his true self a secret to maintain the studio's vision. For Hudson, every day was a performance, and stepping out of line meant risking his career, reputation, and the carefully crafted persona Hollywood built for him. But it wasn't just Hudson. Elizabeth Taylor, one of Hollywood's most glamorous stars, also found her private life manipulated by the studios. Taylor's love life was as much a part of her brand as her acting. Known for her beauty and dramatic romances, she was the center of endless tabloid stories. Her relationships may have seemed spontaneous, but many were orchestrated by the studios to keep her and the films she starred in relevant. Taylor's high-profile romances kept audiences hooked, and studios knew that a little drama could go a long way. A scandalous affair or a high-profile breakup. Perfect publicity. The studio knew that if Taylor was in the headlines, people would line up to see her films. Her love life became another Hollywood production, drawing in fans eager to follow every twist and turn. Studios even tried to guide her love life, nudging her toward relationships that fit her image, or adding extra publicity to keep her name in the headlines. The result? Her life was almost scripted, with real emotions often pushed aside for the sake of the studio. Taylor's private life became a performance, staged to keep audiences fascinated. And this wasn't unusual. Studios were experts at blurring the line between real and fake, crafting actors' lives into stories that mirrored their on-screen roles. If an actress played the girl-next-door type, she'd be seen with wholesome, safe dates, often set up by the studio. If a male star was the playboy, he'd be paired with glamorous women in public to fit the fantasy. Stars were even encouraged to date within the studio system, creating on- and off-screen couples that fans would fall in love with. Hollywood knew that fans wanted more than movies. They wanted fairy tales. They wanted to believe that their favorite stars lived romantic, thrilling lives, just like in the films. And if an actor's real life didn't fit that story, the studio rewrote it. This wasn't about the actor's happiness or authenticity. It was about selling a fantasy. For these stars, image control was stifling. Privacy was a luxury they couldn't afford. Every move, every relationship was analyzed, shaped, and, if necessary, adjusted by studio heads who valued an image over the actor's well-being. Actors were expected to play along, performing for the public even when the cameras were off. And for those who dared to defy the script, the consequences could be harsh. Refusing a studio-arranged relationship or stepping out of their assigned role could lead to career consequences. Studios had the power to make or break a star, and they didn't hesitate to remind actors of that. For Rock Hudson, Elizabeth Taylor, and countless others, being a Hollywood star wasn't just a job, it was a lifestyle dictated by the studio. They weren't just actors, they were characters, crafted to keep fans engaged. Behind the glamorous photos and romantic headlines, these stars were living manufactured stories, selling dreams that weren't their own, blacklisting and political pressures. The golden age of Hollywood wasn't just about movies and star-studded premieres, it was also a time of intense political pressure. The fear of communism swept across America after World War II, and Hollywood wasn't spared. The industry had to align with a fiercely patriotic, conservative image, and anyone who didn't fit was at risk. Enter the Hollywood blacklist, a solution to any hint of un-American behavior. Led by the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUACs, the government began calling actors, writers, and directors to testify about their political beliefs and affiliations. Studios scrambled to protect their reputations, cutting ties with anyone who refused to comply, and blacklisting became the harsh reality for those who didn't fall in line. Charlie Chaplin, one of the world's most beloved actors, was caught in this storm. Known for his powerful voice on social issues, Chaplin wasn't shy about tackling poverty, inequality, and injustice in his films, but his outspoken nature put him at odds with the powers that be. His views didn't fit the image Hollywood or the U.S. government wanted, and soon, accusations of un-American activities were aimed at him. In 1952, Chaplin left the United States under intense scrutiny, unsure if he'd be allowed back. For 20 years, he stayed away, his voice silenced in the country where he'd helped shape the film industry. Screenwriter Dalton Trumbo also became a central figure in Hollywood's blacklist era. A prolific writer, Trumbo was known for his sharp scripts and progressive ideas, but his refusal to testify before HUACs led to a career-altering punishment. He was blacklisted, forbidden from working under his own name. Rather than giving up, Trumbo began writing under pseudonyms, crafting some of Hollywood's most celebrated scripts while hiding in plain sight. Two of his movies, Roman Holiday and The Brave One, even won Academy Awards. But he couldn't claim them. His work was honored, but his name was erased. The blacklist didn't just silence voices, it forced Hollywood's biggest names to turn on each other. Friends were pressured to name names and reveal any colleagues with left-leaning views. The industry became a place of suspicion, where loyalty wasn't measured by friendship or talent, but by obedience. Stars, directors, and writers suddenly had to watch what they said, afraid that a simple opinion could put their careers and their lives at risk. This wasn't just a passing phase. The blacklist had lasting consequences. Many careers were ended overnight, and Hollywood lost countless creative voices. Even those who managed to keep working were haunted by the fear that any misstep could mean ruin. For Chaplin, Trumbo, and so many others, this era wasn't just stifling, it was devastating.